Hey, what's up guys? In this video we're going to be going over Fabfilter's Pro-Q2. This is going to be in webinar format, which means that it's not going to be in a bunch of separate videos. It's going to be in one long video, so let me know if this is something that you are into and you want to see more of. So this is Fabfilter's Pro-Q2, or Pro-Q squared, and it is one of the most capable EQs out there, very flexible. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to click on this thing right down here and make the screen bigger so you can see what's going on. So pretty simple. You have your spectrum here, and if you play a piece of audio, you get that coming in. You have your line here, and this line is where you select to make kind of frequency changes. You can click anywhere on the line, and it creates a band, and that's pretty cool. And what's really neat about it is it's context sensitive. So you click in this area here, and it's always a bell. But if you click down here in the lower end, it tries to guess what you want to do. So you click on here, creates a low cut. Click up here, a high cut. So it really kind of saves, time and space. Time is money. So yeah, we're going to be going over a lot of things. So we shouldn't do the modes quite yet. So yeah, let's go through the filters, because I like to call them filters. So you double click again and you have a bell curve. This is basically what you would use the majority of the time to make changes in your piece of audio, right? You can boost or cut. Usually you're cutting more than you're boosting. So when you're in your mixing stage, say if you have like your kick and your bass, the mid is kind of clashing and you want the bass line to kind of pop through, you wouldn't necessarily boost the bass line. You would actually cut a bit of the kick to make room for the bass line to come in. And production is reduction, and that kind of phrase changed the way I worked when I first heard it, and I was like, oh yeah. And yeah, that prevents, things from muddying, and prevents aggravating issues and making issues get worse, and you don't pull your hair out and stuff like that. So this is the bell curve. This is just a bell, and the reason why is it's shaped like a bell. Funny enough, so right now I'm dragging and moving it around. It works quite well. You can actually also adjust down here the frequency, adjust the gain, and the Q. The Q is how much it's pinched or extruded. So a high Q, you pinch, and a low Q, it's nice and big. You can adjust it kind of like that. You can also hover over and use your mouse wheel and adjust the Q that way. And you can make very, very way more adjustments that way. So one rule, and it's not a hard rule, there's no rules, but this is a general guideline, is for the lower frequencies, you use a narrow Q when you cut. And for the higher frequencies, you use a wider Q. And that just makes a bit more sense. You avoid kind of unnatural kind of wishy-washiness of your sound. This is the general guideline for EQing. Wide Q on higher frequencies, narrow Q on the low frequencies, right? And yeah, that is that. So we're going to move down to the next one, which is a low shelf. So a low shelf is basically what it looks like. You'll notice that it's like that. We can change that by holding Control and clicking on the Q. And what this is, if you want something called a low pass or a high pass, but you don't want it to kind of continue on down, like for example, this is a low cut, right? It'll cut and go all the way down, right? If you want a low shelf and you don't want it to cut, everything below the frequency you're choosing, you can do that. And this is useful for changing like the overall balance. It's kind of, I believe what it's called like a tilt shelf. And what you can do is kind of change. So if you have like a lot of high frequencies, or in this example, if you have a lot of low frequencies and, you want to bring down those lows, you can actually bring those down, and then the higher frequencies stay the same, and you get an overall balance more so achieved in your track. Anyway, that's the low shelf. The low cut is you cut everything below the threshold. No, everything below the cutoff point, which is 124.63 hertz. So you can actually double click on that, and we can type in 30. And 30 hertz is where you cut a lot of the time to get rid of that low end stuff, which brings me to something I'm going to jump around a bit more. So for our analyzer down here, we have pre and post. So we're analyzing it before it's EQ'd and analyzing it after it's EQ'd. So I'll give you an example of our track here. So I've rolled off everything, well, not everything. I've rolled off at 30 hertz, 12 dB per octave, which we'll also get into, and I'll give it a play here. And you can see right, so that solid gray, that right there is our post EQ analyzer, and the one that's in the background, like a lighter gray, is pre. No, the one in the background is before EQing. The one in the foreground is after EQing. So you can see what you've done. So we've affected 30 hertz and below, and you can see that there. So what we've effectively done is, shaved off a little bit of the low end that might be accumulating, and there's that. So one thing to know is you can actually control the steepness of this curve by changing the dB per octave. This is wherever your cutoff point is, you can increase how much is attenuated. So it goes in increments of 12 usually, but there's a lot more options here. It's a factor of 12 usually. 6 dB would be, if you want something a bit more gentle, like a gentle kind of roll off, you'd have it up here. That's if you have a lot of low end energy, but we'll just go back to 30 hertz there. So typically 48 dB per octave is pretty useful, and you can see it's more, you remove more of the low end with a steeper curve. Right? And you can go all the way to 96 dB per octave for a steep kind of surgical curve. Works well. Okie doke. So let's go back to 12 dB per octave, because that's just where we're going to be. High shelf is the same kind of as a low shelf. So if you have just the right amount of base energy and you have quite a bit of high end, you can kind of roll that off at a certain point. This is kind of typically what you do if you have, quite a bit of high end. And this is useful, say, if you are mixing between speakers and you're like, oh, there's a lot of high end on my headphones or whatever, but it sounds good on here. You can shave it off this way. We're actually more sensitive to higher frequency material than the lower end, so we got a bias there. But yeah, that is the high shelf. High cut is a way to attenuate those harsh kind of cymbals or white noise, or very resonant high frequencies. You'd want to do, say, a gentle roll off, because why not? And it sounds more natural, it's less obvious, and the EQ isn't working that hard, and you still can achieve a balance using a smooth dB per octave cutoff mount. A notch is essentially, well, it's kind of what it looks like, a high cut filter and a low cut filter, and we're just kind of notching out an area all the way down. We can adjust the scale here. I'm jumping around quite a bit. 30 hertz, it goes all the way down. This can create, this is when you have like a particular frequency that's really causing problems. It's like it's resonant, or there's something in the room if you record it, or if you have something called one note bass. You can also get some interesting phasing effects here. Right? And a little bit of a fun history lesson. The original, or the Virus B, and yeah, I believe it was the Virus B, it didn't have a phaser. but it had a notch filter. So you would use a notch filter in lieu of a phaser, and that's how a lot of the old phasing effects were done, which was with a notch filter. Pretty fun. Anyway, we have our bandpass, which is kind of the opposite, and we can adjust the Q to kind of pinch it. So it kind of sounds like you're in a telephone, or you're like talking on a phone. Right, so you can have that sort of thing. These are common filters, that's why they're added. They're not, you wouldn't use this for mastering. Well, maybe you would, kind of doing this, I don't know. Which, you know, you'd want more control anyway. You'd want to use a high cut and a low pass filter, but to each his own, whatever. And then you have a tilt shelf, which I've already kind of said, this is, I confused you and I confused myself. A tilt shelf is a high shelf and a low shelf, and you can adjust the overall tilt of your frequency range. So if you need to take out some high end, but then add more low end, which you might want to go for, you can do that. And you can, I'm mouse wheeling right now to adjust the Q, so you can kind of have it right in the middle. Add some low end, take away some high end, or vice versa. Right, we're at a very high scale here. I wouldn't use, you know, that much, but it's up to you. Anyway, so that is the tilt shelf. I'm gonna go back to the bell. I'm actually gonna go back to my default setting. So we got 12 dB. We have our line again. I'm gonna click on my piano. What does this piano mean? Well, when you hit a note, it corresponds with an actual frequency. So if your track is in the key of, I think this is in G, you can kind of know if you have any kind of problem frequencies or ringing. So like if you're EQing your bass, you don't want to EQ at G, which would be probably around here. So 97.99 hertz. You wouldn't want to do a cut here because then you take out the fundamental, and that's not good. So it prevents, you know, a lot of guesswork. And again, if you have like one note bass or there's like a ringiness, be like, oh my god, so the room that I recorded whatever in, it has like a comb filter at this frequency. You can be like, okay, well, I can fix that. So that's all well and good. And it's, you know, it's always good to find the correlation between what note you're hitting and the frequency. It kind of goes away here because as you go down to 24 hertz or whatever, or above, you know, 47 hertz, pitch is not really discernible by the human ear. So right around here is kind of important, and that's where the pitch is discernible. So gives you a rough guideline, which is pretty cool in my opinion. So you have your, I should maybe go over this. So say you have a bunch of these, and you know, we can add a bunch. You can actually select them and go through them with this little number thing. So I'm going from 3 to 1, and if I leave my mouse off of it, it'll go back to where it is so I can see it. And that's pretty neat. One thing I want to mention is there's this little gear, and what this does is this mimics the kind of old school EQ, where as you boost or change the gain, the Q will adjust automatically. I'll give you an example of that. Oh wait, that's not good. So the Q will kind of open and close and change as you boost and cut in extreme values, and that mimics, you know, the old SSL 4000 consoles, which is pretty good. Let's go back to the default setting. There's also presets up here. You can also full screen, which is pretty neat. If you really want to dive in, or you have a dedicated monitor, you want to look at, you know, frequencies all day, you can do that. So in the default, we are in the left and right mode. So we got left, we got right, and we have a join of left and right. So when you adjust this, you're adjusting the left and right at the same time. You can adjust the left and right independently, so you'll hit that. This particular band is adjusting the left, and then we'll select this one. This is also selecting the left. It'll say right there. We can have that to select the right, so we can adjust, like, you know, stereo kind of things there. We can get some neat effects. You can make things sound a bit wider or whatever. Me personally, I don't necessarily do things on the left and right, but whatever, you can. And that is selected here. So you that left and right. All right, cool. And that's all the default. And then we have mid-side. So what is mid-side? Well, by default, if you have mid-side selected, mid-side is linked. This is the same as left and right. But if you select the mid, this is the mono material. So what it does is it takes the left and right and then does some math and brings them together. And whatever is similar between the left and right is the mid, and whatever is different is the side. So think of the mid as the mono material and the side as the stereo material. I'll give you an example of that. So I'm going to go high cut here. So I'm going to kind of shave off all the mid slowly, and you can kind of hear that just the side is left, which is neat. Pretty neat. So let's go into our sides. I want to select that and hit that for side. I'm going to use a high shelf. I'm going to boost the side material and maybe achieve a wider sound. As an example, just to kind of make it more exaggerated so you can hear it. So the general workflow for this, like, this is a very monocentric track. Not quite done, but whatever. So how you would do it is you'd have it set to mid-side, right? And then you'd double click here. It's context sensitive, so it'll create a low cut. I want that to side. So it'll take out the stereo material in the low end. And that will leave, and that will, you can't really hear it, but it will prevent stereo material from accumulating in the low end, which can cause problems. You get something called, you just get like a weird moving bass that doesn't sound too good. So yeah, we have that. And yeah, from there, we can select mid. Oops. I want that to be side, sorry. And then from here we can select mid, and then we can increase the mono energy and the high end. And a common technique is this right here, and I apologize for its name, but it's called giving the track tits. And this adds energy to the high end without necessarily affecting the stereo image with the side material. The side material contributes to the stereo image. Right, so there is that, and that's mid-side, and it's kind of a weird tool to wrap your head around, but you know, the theory is, again, mid is mono, side is the stereo, right? And I can give you a better example. You can give yourself an example. Don't you like giving yourself examples? If you have a utility, so a width of 200 is just the side material. This is the side material. So obviously this track needs a bit of work to kind of brighten it up. It's WIP, but whatever. And then with it set to 0, it's just the mid. So this is completely mono. Which doesn't sound too good, but drag in some tracks that you like and you'll be able to see and hear it. Anyway, so there's that. Another thing is the frequency range. You can leave it at this, like you're not, like, things are generally pretty loud. You know, you don't need to look at all these dynamics, so leave it at that. Resolution, I like to have mine low. I don't want to see too much because it gets, you know, a little, you know, irritating. But it does take the average, but yeah. Speed slow, because I like to look at things. And the tilt you want to leave. So what this does is this adjusts the tilt of the EQ. The EQ spectrum analyzer is less sensitive to the higher frequencies and more sensitive to the lows, because that's how our ears work. And it's, you know, a spectrum tilt that, you know, it's pretty important. And I might do that. I might cover that more in a later video. Zero latency. Okay, see, these are your latency options. So zero latency is pretty good in most cases. You know, like not a lot of records have been ruined using zero latency, but there are better areas. So without getting too deep into it, when you EQ in the lower range, you get something weird happens with the phase. And the way to kind of combat that is to throw more processing at it and more latency at it. You get something called a linear phase EQ. Linear phase is basically a higher quality EQ, and if you can afford to use it, use it. You have a medium, which works 99.9% of the time very well. If you're mixing, I don't know, if Guns N' Roses is recording in your studio and you are processing, yeah, you're going to want to use 32-bit depth, like all that. Like, just use everything. Throw everything at it. You know, whatever. But yeah, usually medium is pretty good. And this is the linear phase option. Linear phase EQ. Yeah, it says right there. Leaves the phase, the original, still intact. Right? You can read the help menu. So, and natural phase is an in-between. Natural phase, it's like their own kind of thing. It's a compromise, and it works pretty well. So yeah, I use zero latency, but if I'm working on something in the low end, and I'm really digging into the low end and doing stuff, then I switch to linear phase, just because I have the processing and I can handle it. But yeah, geez, that is a video and a half. What else? Yeah, you have your typical phase invert button. That's good. What's this? Is this the A? Yeah, auto gain. Auto gain is pretty cool because auto gain will. Okay, so humans, which I'm happy to say are all of us, humans perceive louder sounds as being better. So if you boost something, you know, this is an extreme example, but if you boost something, it'll sound better. If you compress something and it gets louder, it sounds better. What this does is this: if you boost something, or when you're working in your EQ or whatever, it'll automatically bring down the gain or bring it up in relation. It kind of guesses how loud this is, and it makes the loud, it kind of normalizes it. So what this kind of combats is you actually hear what the EQ is doing and not necessarily listening to like how awesome it sounds because it's a little bit louder. Like, so we have our high gain or our high end, and we're boosting our high end. We can actually hear what the EQ is doing if we have that off. So it's if you're not used to the auto gain, the auto gain feature in this, it can be a little weird. So you just kind of have to live with it and practice it for a while. But it is pretty useful because you actually listen to what the EQ is doing, like the actual how you're affecting the frequencies, not how you're making them louder. Anyway, 25 minutes. Hope you guys enjoyed. Take care and have a good one.